All right, in this segment, we'll be talking about how to create a tileable wooden texture. Now, tileable textures are really important for most gameplay design for anything you're creating, because tileable textures allow you to have a small size texture that's repeated over and over and tiled in different directions to give the illusion that it's something that goes on for a much larger space. Now, having that is very important because then you can kind of create this player immersion to make it believable that this huge, say for instance, was this wooden texture. It's this huge crate or huge box or huge pier that looks like it goes on. You know, it's got a lot of depth to it, a lot of character, but in reality, it's only a small texture and just the model and the tiling texture to really doing the work. So I found this wooden texture that I really liked. It has a little bit of character to it. Has some variety to it. It's not too noisy. It's something that I'm going to basically take and I'm going to edit this and make it tileable, so that way I can use it on my crate, so that it'll see something that it looks unique, but also has enough of a kind of a tileability that will make it look so it's not just the same texture repeating over and over. So some of the rules for UDK, just to keep in mind, is how it actually uses texture sizes is it makes it so that it can scale up and down depending on the texture size, and also distance from character or camera, among other things. And so the general rules you want to follow is keeping to these kind of sizes of textures. So you want like a 32 by 32 texture, or say, for instance, if it was something typically tileable that's seen pretty close up, you want something 256 by 256 or 512 by 512, or something sometimes even 1024 by 1024. Now, something 1024 by 1024 or 2048 by 2048 is usually something very specific or something created very as a unique asset, and not so much something that's tileable. That's going to be something that's going to use a lot of texture space and need a lot of really pertinent detail to really establish what the object is. And so we're going to be going with a 1024 or 10 by 1024 just for the sake of this exercise. But typically for this texture that I would be creating, I would probably scale it down to a 512 by 512 to save some space. And like I said, when you're in the game and you're actually seeing this, if you're further away from it, it might take your 512 by 512 texture map and scale it down to a 256 by 256, or even a 128 by 128, just based on distance, because you don't really need to see those little crisp details, and it helps with the rendering and processing within the engine. So I'm going to go ahead and open Photoshop with this texture here, and we're going to go ahead and convert this to a layer. So you double click it to convert it to a layer from a background. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to try to I need the crop tool, and we're going to change this to a 1 by 1 square because I want it tileable. And I want a square that I can see tiles up and to the sides. So also with the the size thing I was mentioning before, with the 128 by 128, all that kind of setup, the important thing to know is also that these numbers can be interchangeable. So you can have a texture that may be 512 by 1024, or say 256 by 32. It just needs to be within these kind of parameters so that UDK understands it can scale it properly. So for this, I'm going to make it a square just because it's easier for how I've had this already set up. And I'm going to go in here, and I'm actually going to try to find the area. I want it to kind of sit on these seams here, so that way when I cut it and crop it down, I can use these seams for my benefit, because I'm going to have it so that it stops on a seam and begins on a seam, so that way when I make this tileable, it won't look like it has any seams to it. So I'm going to go ahead and move this into here. Actually, I'm going to move this crop over some so I can get this area right here. So it's on a pretty good seam there. And on the other side here, let's move this over some. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and crop that. And so you saw I kind of try to line it up with the seams. So now what I need to do is I need to test to see if it tiles horizontal, going up this way, if it tiles this way, so that way when this edge here will line up with the edge above it. And so how I can test that is go to Filter, Other, Offset, and let's say make it 500 by 500. what that's going to do is it's going to tile our texture in both directions. It's going to make our texture go to the right, offset it by 500 to the right, but also continue wrapping the pixels around so you can tell if it's tileable. Now you can see here we have a little issue because it doesn't quite line up. So how we're going to fix that, we're actually going to undo. And so we go back to our original texture, and we're going to actually rotate our texture slightly. So we're going to Control T and rotate by about 2 degrees. Go ahead and hit enter. And let's test that to see if that lines up any better. Filter, other, offset, 500 by 500. And you can see now the lines are kind of at a point where they would tile down and it would work pretty well. And so that's what we're looking for at this point. So we're going to undo this one more time so that we can make sure we crop it one more time so we can get those little edges that have been rotated off. And then we're going to filter, other, offset again, 500 by 500. And now we're going to start cleaning up these edges by hand. And how we're going to do that is with a tool called the Clone Stamp tool. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow you to sample a selection of pixels and then basically move those pixels and duplicate them into another area within the map. And it's actually going to be a really cool tool, and it'll help you. It'd be really useful because you can actually make it look like this texture goes on forever and doesn't have any seams, and it doesn't repeat. So things you also want to look out for when you're doing this is things like this knot here, because this knot is going to be really recognizable when you start to see the texture repeated over and over, especially to the viewer that's just kind of passing by and looking. Something like this will really catch their eye. So you want to kind of dumb that down some. So let's go ahead and start painting out some of these seams. So we're going to sample from here by clicking Alt on our keyboard and clicking with our left mouse button. And that's going to sample from that area. As you can see, it's duplicated that within our radius here. So if I scale this up, you can see, and I start painting with this, it's actually taken this selection up here and repeated the pixels down here. So we can keep doing that. And that's going to allow us to get rid of these seams, this seam on the edge, so it looks like it continuously goes on forever. Now one thing you want to avoid, you see here you have the same kind of like little area that's been multiplied 3 times now. So you want to get rid of that by kind of like coming back and painting that out with something else. So those are things to be aware of. And I'm doing this a little haphazardly now. But when you do this, you want to really take your time to make sure there's nothing that looks like it's repeated over and over, and something that looks like it's really organic in shape and has kind of been made naturally like wood is. So if I zoom out, you can kind of see it's starting to come together. There's still some areas I would definitely want to come back in here and clean up. But the major thing is to make sure that these kind of lines line up so that when it's tiled this direction, it looks like there's no seams. And also to make sure when it's tiled horizontally, it looks like it has no seams. The color differences here are a little strange, so we want to make sure we take care of that by continuing to clone things. But the thing also to keep in mind is it's good sometimes to actually change our brush that we're using to clone with. And that'll give us different results as well. So say for instance I use this brush instead of the other. It's going to give me a different kind of painterly effect down here that might give us something that looks a little bit more organic in shape from a distance. Now I'm going to continue to kind of clean this up, and we'll move on to our next section.